slipping into the grand ballroom while the staff adjusted table linens and polished glassware. The chandeliers sparkled over rows of white lilies, and through the tall windows, Lake Michigan stretched gray and endless, with the sand of Oak Street Beach dusted in morning frost. It should have felt festive, but all I saw were crooked place cards and clumsy seating arrangements that would ignite arguments before the champagne was poured. I moved quietly from table to table, nudging centerpieces, swapping names, correcting disasters no one else seemed to notice. Saris. My father called from the dais, holding a clipboard as if he were still running a factory floor. Make sure the ushers know where to direct people. Don't reorganize everything the way you always do. Yes, Dad, I answered, smoothing down a silver runner he hadn't noticed was twisted. It was never a request. Always a directive. Marla, my mother, appeared at my shoulder, gaze sweeping me like an inspector. That navy dress, she murmured. So severe. You look like you're heading to a board meeting, not your sister's wedding. I pressed my palm over the silk, the cut as elegant as it was practical. Good morning to you. Too. Mom. She didn't answer, only turned to point out how radiant Elodie looked in her gown, as if I were a shadow beside her light. By 9, a cluster of relatives had gathered near the entry. My cousin smirked, telling anyone who would listen that my little cabin up north must be cozy. Laughter spread easily, none of them realizing that cabin was a lakefront house in Lake Geneva, bought outright with years of work they never cared to ask about. I stayed silent, steadying a vase of roses while they chuckled. Last month I had transferred $50,000 to cover the band and the extra flowers. Yet no one mentioned that. My contributions were never spoken of, as if generosity was just another obligation to be crossed off. I set down the last glass, the ballroom bright and ready for photographs, when I heard my aunt's voice rising over the chatter. She wanted me at the head table to double-check the final touches, a summons disguised as inclusion. I walked slowly toward her, already bracing for the next reminder of how little space I truly held in this family. Growing up, the script had always been the same. Elodie was the darling praised for her sweetness, her charm, her so-called grace. I was the difficult one, the daughter who asked too many questions, who preferred books to dances, who turned down suitors because I wanted something larger than small-town approval. Too independent, they said, as if ambition were an illness that needed curing. Now, as adults, the pattern had hardened into habit. Elodie glided through rooms collecting compliments, while I was met with polite nods that quickly turned into whispered critiques. I knew the subtext well. She was the daughter they wanted. I was the daughter they tolerated. Behind the scenes, though, the cracks in their performance were clear. My mother's obsession with appearances had sharpened as their finances thinned. Her retirement accounts had dwindled after years of overextending for charity galas and country club dues. The pearls around her neck looked like armor, each strand a reminder that she couldn't afford to let anyone suspect weakness. My father carried his own strain, though he tried to bury it beneath authority. Alder Industrial, the family company, was wobbling. The expansion loan he'd staked his pride on had become a liability. Bankers wanted a stronger cash cushion, and he didn't have it. That morning, while the photographers set up along the balcony, Elodie slipped into the anteroom where I was checking a seating list. Her veil brushed against my arm as she leaned close, her smile as soft as her tone was sharp. You'll do the right thing for me, won't you? I looked at her, my sister dressed in layers of satin and expectation, and saw what she meant. Not a request, not gratitude, but assumption. In her mind, the lake house I had built from a decade of work was already hers. I folded the seating chart and placed it on the table without answering. Entitlement cloaked in the language of family love was still entitlement. I stepped into the corridor that ran behind the ballroom, intending only to catch a moment of quiet. Voices carried through the half-open service door, low but unmistakable my parents'. Gideon's tone was practiced, the cadence of a man rehearsing lines. After the champagne toast, I'll announce that Saris is giving the lake house to her sister as a wedding gift. It'll bring the house down. Marla's reply was clipped, steady. She won't make a scene. Not here. Not in front of 200 guests. She's too proud for that. The words settled in my chest like ice. This wasn't a passing idea. They had built it into the evening, polished and rehearsed, counting on my silence to seal it. The thought of my name, my property, being used as stagecraft made my jaw tighten. I leaned against the wall, remembering a meeting from 2 years earlier. Harlan Co. had pressed a contract across his desk, his eyes sharper than usual. Clause 15.3, he'd said, tapping the page. Right of first refusal. Anti-coercion protection. If anyone tries to force you to transfer that property, we intervene. Family included. I'd laughed then, embarrassed by how extreme it sounded, but he hadn't smiled. You'll thank me one day. That day had arrived. The lake house wasn't just real estate, it was my sanctuary, the place where I worked late on strategy calls with Singapore, the reward for 10 years of red-eye flights and 80-hour weeks. They weren't asking me to share in celebration. They were scripting a spectacle meant to strip me of choice. From the ballroom came the muffled rise of strings as musicians tuned their instruments. The air in the hallway smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood, but beneath it all was the sour taste of betrayal. I straightened, smoothed my dress, and walked back toward the light of the chandeliers. If they were ready to set the trap in front of the crowd, then they had forgotten one thing: I was no longer the daughter who stayed silent. The band had just finished its set when my father rose, spoon tapping against his champagne glass. The chatter softened, chairs scraped into neat rows of attention, and 200 guests turned toward the head table. Gideon Alder was in his element, smiling like a statesman, microphone glinting under the chandeliers. Family, he began, his voice booming across the ballroom, is what gives us strength. Tonight, we celebrate Elodie and Brian, their union, their promise. And because family means everything to us, we have a gift to share. I felt the shift before the words left his mouth. The script I had overheard was about to be performed. Saris, he said, sweeping an arm toward me as though I were complicit, has graciously agreed to give her sister the Lake Geneva house as a wedding present. The room erupted applause, gasps, murmurs of admiration. Elodie pressed her hands to her chest, eyes shimmering with tears she had rehearsed in the mirror. Oh my God, Saris, she whispered into her own microphone, her voice amplified. Are you serious? The lake house, dozens of heads turned, all eyes searching for my nod, my smile, the cue to confirm the fairy tale. I set my glass on the table and rose slowly. That, I said, my voice carrying without need of amplification, was not discussed with me. The lake house is not available. The applause fractured into silence, replaced by the hiss of whispers sliding from table to table. She's selfish, cold, even today. Imagine ruining your sister's wedding. The judgments settled on me like ash. Across the room, my cousin Derek raised his phone higher. The red light of a live stream blinked, recording every angle, every breath. My father's face stiffened, but he forced a chuckle into the mic. Don't be difficult, sweetheart. This is family. Of course you want to make your sister happy. I kept my voice even, the same tone I used in boardrooms when shutting down a bad deal. Her happiness doesn't require my home. Elodie's lips trembled, her perfect tears spilling on cue. I thought you wanted the best for me. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. I do, but I won't sign away what's mine. The ballroom shifted uneasily, torn between sympathy and spectacle. The band stood frozen. Plates cooled on silver trays. The only sound was the relentless click of the photographer's camera and the whisper of my mother's heels as she rose from her chair. She was moving toward me, eyes narrowed, hands clenched, and for the first time that evening, the applause had died completely. My mother rose from the head table like a storm breaking loose. The chatter had already thinned to silence, but her heels struck the floor like punctuation, each step sharper than the last. Guests shifted in their chairs, torn between horror and fascination. Phones tilted higher, the glow of live streams spreading through the room like sparks across dry grass. She closed the distance, her voice cutting through the stillness. Ungrateful, she hissed. The word meant only for me, but carried by the microphone still clutched in her hand. After everything we've given you, after every sacrifice we've made, you dare humiliate us. I stood rooted, my hands steady at my sides, my breathing slow. I had been in boardrooms where millions hung in the balance, where older men tried to bait me into faltering. This was no different. Her hand rose before I could even decide how I might answer. The crack of flesh against flesh echoed through the ballroom, sharper than the strings, louder than the clinking of crystal. My head snapped to the side. Heat flooded my cheek, and a stunned silence fell over the room. Something small and bright flew across the marble my diamond earring, the one I had bought for myself after closing the soul deal. It landed 10 feet away, glinting under the chandelier like a shard of ice. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The band stopped mid-chord. A child whimpered at the back of the hall. The camera clicks paused, then redoubled, frantic to catch every frame. And above it all, the live stream's red dot kept blinking, relentless, broadcasting to whoever cared to watch. Marla froze, her arms still half lifted, her chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Around her, faces registered shock, pity, even admiration for the spectacle. Gideon half rose from his chair, then faltered, as if the weight of 200 witnesses had pinned him down. I straightened slowly, smoothed my dress, and turned without a word. My heels echoed as I crossed the ballroom. I reached the earring, bent down, and picked it up with deliberate calm, sliding it back into place. I adjusted the clasp until it held. The room remained hushed, as though every person there had forgotten how to breathe. I lifted my chin, met my sister's wide eyes across the dais, and said clearly, "Congratulations." Elodie. No apology, no retreat, no breakdown. Just those words, measured and final. Then I turned, collected my clutch from my chair, and walked through the heavy doors at the edge of the ballroom. The cold air outside hit like a wall. Lake Michigan's wind funneling down Michigan Avenue, sharp enough to sting. My cheek burned hot where her hand had landed, but my mind had never felt clearer. I inhaled the winter air, pulled my coat tighter, and started down the stone steps. The cameras behind me still flashed, the murmur of chaos swelling as the doors closed. Inside, they could tear each other apart. Out here, the path forward was mine alone. The glass doors of the Drake swung shut behind me, sealing in the noise of panic and whispers. The lobby's marble floor gleamed under soft light, and for the first time all evening I was beyond their reach. My cheek still throbbed, but I didn't raise a hand to it. Pain wasn't the point anymore. I slipped my phone from my clutch and dialed Harlan Co. He answered before the second ring. "Madison," he said, voice clipped, businesslike. "It's Saris," I corrected, my voice steady. "Green light. 15.3. There was a beat of silence, then the rustle of paper, the unmistakable tone of a man already in motion. "Understood. I'm in Chicago now, 2 blocks from Willis Tower. Legal's here with me. We'll be ready in less than an hour. Make it sooner," I said, already moving. I ended the call without ceremony and stepped out into the cold. The valet hurried toward me, but I waved him off and walked directly to my car. The wind off Lake Michigan cut sharper than glass, but it cleared my head as I slid behind the wheel. The drive north toward Lake Geneva felt both endless and immediate. Each traffic light blinked like a metronome, marking the seconds until the trap collapsed on the ones who had set it. My phone buzzed against the console notifications exploding from the live stream, messages from colleagues who had already seen enough. I ignored them. At the tollway, I pressed speed dial for the security office at the lake house. "New list," I said. "Effective immediately. No entry without my explicit authorization, especially family." "Yes, Ms. Alder," came the reply. Calm, professional. Exactly what I needed. I hung up and watched the dark ribbon of highway stretch out ahead. The house they thought they could take with applause and pressure was now fortified with law and foresight. The game had shifted. They believed they had staged the perfect humiliation. Instead, they had handed me every witness, every record, every proof I could ever need. The trap had snapped shut, but not on me. By the time I reached the state line, my phone buzzed again. Harlan's text was brief. "In the ballroom, standing by." Back in Chicago, the reception had turned into a spectacle. Guests milled in uneasy clusters, whispers rising louder than the band ever had. My mother paced like a caged animal. My father kept checking his phone, and Elodie clung to Brian's arm, her tears timed for maximum sympathy. Then the doors opened and Harlan C.O. walked in. Tailored charcoal suit, expression cool as steel, 2 attorneys flanking him with leather briefcases. Conversations died mid-sentence. The room tilted toward him as if gravity itself had shifted. He didn't take the microphone. He simply spoke, his voice carrying with unshakable authority. "My name is Harlan C.O. I am the CEO of CO West Capital and owner of 40% of Alder Industrial Fabrication." The silence broke into gasps. My father's face drained of color. "I've reviewed the live stream from this evening," Harlan continued, holding up a phone one of the attorneys had cued. "I saw a public attempt to coerce an executive into relinquishing corporate property. I saw an assault broadcast to thousands. Both are unacceptable." He set the phone on the head table, its red light still blinking. For clarity, the Lake Geneva house was part of Ms. Alder's compensation package. It is legally protected under Clause 15.3 of her contract. Any attempt to pressure her into surrendering it is null, void, and actionable. The attorneys opened their briefcases and spread documents across linen stained with spilled champagne. Pages rustled, pens clicked. Harlan's gaze cut to my parents. "You have 48 hours to issue a public apology to Ms. Alder acknowledging her property rights and professional achievements. Fail, and I will exercise my rights as shareholder to convene an emergency board meeting. I doubt your creditors will enjoy reading why." Marla's scream tore through the air, shrill and disbelieving. Gideon sagged in his chair, sweat glistening at his temples. Elodie's perfect mask trembled, her smile collapsing into something raw and ugly. And through it all, I knew this wasn't rescue. This was the contingency I had built, finally unfolding exactly as designed. By morning, the live stream had spread beyond wedding guests and curious relatives. Vendors in Elk Grove forwarded clips to each other, shaking their heads at the Alder names spoken over and over. Within hours, 3 long-term suppliers announced they were reviewing contracts, their cautious phrasing hiding what everyone knew they were distancing themselves. At noon, the first major blow landed. Patterson Logistics, worth $3 million annually to Alder Industrial, canceled their renewal outright. The email leaked almost instantly, circulated among industry groups as proof that the fallout was real. My father's calls to the board went unanswered. His name, once tied to steady reliability, now trailed words like coercion, assault, and liability. The photographs arrived next crisp. high-resolution shots from the wedding photographer, who had quietly sent duplicates to Sayo West's legal team. My mother's hand suspended mid-swing, my head turned from the force, the earring glittering in mid-air. Each frame was sharper than memory. Impossible to deny. The attorneys cataloged them carefully. Evidence prepared in case the family thought denial was an option. Marla tried a different tactic. She went online, writing a furious post about betrayal, selfish daughters, and what family should mean. But screenshots spread faster than her words could be deleted. Her entitlement, her cruelty, what she thought was defense became permanent record, each share another nail in the coffin of her reputation. I said nothing. There was no need. Every frame, every post, every canceled contract spoke louder than I ever could. Silence became my strongest statement. That evening, I sat by the window of my Lake Geneva house, the lake frozen in the last light of day. My phone buzzed with updates from Harlan, from counsel, from colleagues who called my resolve inspiring. I let the screen dim and placed it face down. The world was speaking, and for once, it was not against me. 47 hours after Harlan delivered his ultimatum, my father issued the apology. It read like it had been drafted by lawyers, every word polished but hollow acknowledgement of my right to the lake house, acknowledgement of my professional achievements, a formal line about regret. It satisfied the letter of the demand, but none of its spirit. My mother refused altogether. Instead, she posted another tirade online, one that was shared so widely that it became proof of her own undoing. Elodie's marriage, barely days old, began to fracture. Brian's parents asked for counseling before recognizing the union formally. Entitlement had a way of revealing itself in every corner, and they didn't want to be pulled into the wreckage. While my family unraveled, Sayo West called me into the Willis Tower offices. The board had voted to promote me to Senior Vice President of Global Development. The package came with a raise and stock options large enough to buy another house, though I had no interest in more property. Instead, I donated the bonus to a women's shelter in Milwaukee that specialized in helping women leave abusive households. It felt like a better use of victory. Back at Lake Geneva, the season shifted slowly toward spring. I walked the shore path most mornings, past old Victorian boathouses in the Black Point estate, each step grounding me in a history that wasn't mine, but reminded me I was building one of my own. The gate to my property clicked shut behind me, locked with a new key only I carried. At sunrise, coffee in hand, I watched light scatter across the frozen lake. No one asked, no one demanded, no one expected. I existed without permission,